SportsLit is co-founded and co-hosted by Neil Acharya and Nate Sager. Engineer and technical producer, Michael Ella. Executive producer, Neil Acharya. Welcome to SportsLit. I'm Neil Acharya.
And I am Nathan Sager.
Today we are speaking with Ted Nolan regarding his autobiography, Life in Two Worlds, a coach's journey from the reservation to the NHL and back, written with Meg Masters, published by Viking Penguin Random House Canada. It was released on October 10th.
Indeed, we're going to go dig in the corners with one-time NHL Coach of the Year, Ted Nolan, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, Neil.
If you had the slightest cultural awareness or social consciousness, you were aware that when Ted Nolan took the reins of an NHL team, here was something and someone different. For starters, he stood out behind the bench of the Buffalo Sabres when he took over in the 1995-96 season. He didn't look like anyone else. And in Ojibwe, Ted was born the third youngest of 12 children on the Garden River First Nation near Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario in 1958. The proud son of Stan and Rose Nolan. It didn't take long to figure out he wasn't going to do things the conventional way either. Now in 2023, we get a clearer picture as to why. And that's because for the first time, we really get to know the man. Social upheaval has led everyone, whether it's advertisers or in this case publishers, to seek out different voices across all areas to share their story. And there's a climate now in which Ted Nolan feels comfortable to share his story in great and often painful detail.
And when you say painful, Neil, what popped to mind was early in the book when Ted recalls the pattern from, get-togethers at the Nolans when he was a boy. His mom, Rose, whom he later named a scholarship fund after, she was this welcoming soul. So she drew people to her. People would come over to play cards, and you had to imagine, relate to your own childhood. You're in bed, you're overhearing what the adults are talking about that you're not supposed to hear. And he writes that, quote, the early evening tales were often funny ones, but slowly the laughter faded and the conversation grew quieter. And that was from people who could only suppress, bad memories and the hurt from the ongoing decimation of their community and their culture for so long. And that's when he got an idea of what had been done by the Canadian state and the churches that ran the residential schools, and that led to him to say, "Hey, I'm not going to repeat that." I'm, developed his cultural awareness and became to understood that just being authentically himself and an Ojibwe person from Gitaganzivi, Garden River, was just an act of defiance, especially when he went into that space, the arena of these high level hockey. I'll just share a quick personal memory of how I first became aware of him. My granddad, whom I referenced in the Dave Hill episode a couple weeks ago, he actually lived in Sault Ste. Marie the last 2 decades of his life, and he had in '93 when Sault Ste. Marie hosted and won the Memorial Cup. Well, he had saved this poster with the team picture, and there's Ted in the front row, and I could sort of see, okay, what's the story with this fellow who kind of obviously stands out in a hockey team picture from the 90s.
Yeah, and I just want to digress a little bit too. I think it's very, very important to note that Ted, throughout this narrative, states he grew up in a loving household with a loving family, and then there were issues like alcohol that would linger with some of his siblings, but and through that, and then as you talked about those weekend kind of parties at his house, Ted's escape was playing hockey on an outdoor rink, which he made himself. It's still very important to note that he said he grew up with a lot of maybe not structure, but a lot of love and support in many ways through his parents and his siblings. So let's not get into convenient narratives, because we just don't want to do that. But there is racism Ted faced outright, and that it's twofold: outright, especially when he's younger, and maybe it hits its height when he leaves Garden River to play junior A hockey in Kenora, Ontario. But there's also this subtle racism, and we've heard that term over and over again. What is it? It's that doubt or that lingering feeling or questioning. If this situation transpired with someone else in it, would it have happened another way? Why did that kind of happen to me? And that almost takes over. And as we see with Ted, when one gets to the point where they can fight back, and it's easy to be overtly racist to a kid, especially in that era. I think less so when they're able to fight back, and then as time evolves, it can become more subtle, and it sort of does for Ted. And over the course of his hockey career, we kind of find that he's often separate or separated, and he's put into scenarios that it'd be easy to say, hey, I don't know if he's getting an equal or a fair shake here. And it made me think of the book I have in my hand here, Call Me Indian by Fred Saskamoose, who's a generation prior to Ted Nolan. He's the first NHL's first treaty Indigenous player, and he writes about a road trip he takes with his Chicago Blackhawks teammates, and then they're going all along the West Coast. He's invited with these guys to go out. I think it might have been at season's end, and then they're going to drive back towards the East Coast. And once they get to Bismarck, North Dakota, they say, well, you can just get home from here. We're gonna go on to Winnipeg. You can get to Moose Jaw on your own. Now, yeah, Moose Jaw might have been a little to the north, well, a lot to the north, and maybe further back west. But you go, that just am I? As Fred Saskamoose says, had I misjudged their friendship or acceptance? And also, I'm sure if it was Fred and his friends, and someone else was the odd person out, they would never have let that happen, right? Everyone would get home. Is kind of like, hey, you think about those things and you move ahead, and it's a loose comparison. But Ted Nolan in 2001 with the Islanders. Now, this isn't when he coached the Islanders later on in 06, 07, and 07, 08. After his first stint with the Sabres, he gets an interview with the Islanders mid-season after they are trying to replace Butch Goring, and Mike Milbury's in charge, and he says, well, come to meet with me about this a head coaching job, and he's like, my assistants are going to take you out for dinner. But he finds out it's not it's not a restaurant, it's not even a bar with like a place with good burgers. It's a full on watering hole, and he says he left, right? Would that situation have happened if it was someone else, another candidate for the job? Why am I going to a bar? I've flown in, I'm hungry. Why aren't we just sitting over dinner like you would with anyone else? Now,
that gets in your head. That's something that's universal, and it's compounded when you're
yes,
Indigenous or
you just go through some
minority.
things like that. So that I found that really interesting. But I mean, listen, let's move forward here to who Ted is as a hockey player, because that's as important as anything else. And in 1978, Ted's drafted by the Detroit Red Wings, and he also plays for Pittsburgh before retiring because of a serious back injury. He ruptured 2 discs, found out after the fact, too, getting leveled in a game. I believe it was in Vancouver, and then that was at the age of 28 in 1985-86. And he gets to the NHL using ragtag equipment, and that means skates several sizes too big. Sticks he kept together in one piece with finishing nails and tape. So it's remarkable that he gets anywhere really playing that way.
Yeah, it's a story of raw hunger. It could never happen today. Nowadays, hockey players, there's all this sports-specific training. It's funny. I'd always just think, there's that video that was circulated of Toronto Maple Leafs star winger Mitch Marner when he's about 4 years old, skating circles around everybody, and you're like, okay, he's already a future pro. Ted, I think he said he didn't even really play on a formal team until he was about 12, and I know Reggie Leach, who was from Manitoba and once scored 61 goals in the season for the Philadelphia Flyers. It was similar with him. It's just that's how much it changed. Now, as a player, Nolan had the unique distinction. He was a teammate of 16-year-old Wayne Gretzky in the Sioux, 18-year-old Steve Yzerman in Detroit, and 20-year-old Mario Lemieux in Pittsburgh. So if he ever has to pick an all-star team of people he played with, there's half of the top six forward core right there. He also writes pretty warmly about his experience in the American Hockey League with the Adirondack Red Wings, where he won the Calder Cup in 1982.
Yeah, with Mark Osborne.
Yeah, hiya, Ozzy again.
So yeah, that's quite a murderer's row of players he played with, as you say, Ted, or sorry, as you say, Nate, and Ted though he says it's a relief when he stops playing. And I think he embraces the control perhaps of coaching, and that's his true calling. And he takes the Sioux Greyhounds to 3 consecutive Memorial Cup tournaments, and then he wins it in 1992-93. He also had a part in the Eric Lindros trade whirlwind, which we talked about in our last episode with Doug McLean and with Scott Morrison.
Yeah, briefly, it was quite something. The OHL literally changed the rules for what would happen if someone gets taken by a team in what they call their priority selection draft, because they don't really want to call it a draft. It refuses to go to their team. Lindros didn't want to play in the Sioux, so the league had to, okay, we'll create a 10-day window in January when you can trade him, and they made a deal with Oshawa. Lindros got a Memorial Cup with Oshawa, and then the Sioux, kind of ran the league for the next 3 years. As a OHL nerd, I have to point out, 30 years since that Greyhounds run in the early 90s, there's only been 2 other teams to play in 3 consecutive Memorial Cup tournaments. But neither of them played in their league final 3 seasons in a row, like the Hounds did, back-to-back winning the league, and then a league runner-up, and then winning the tournament as a host team in 93, Neil.
Nate, was one of those teams you mentioned Windsor?
No, it was not Windsor. Kelowna Rockets 03 to 05, the middle year, they were the host team, and I think they lost in the 3rd round of the Western League playoffs, and then London Knights 2012 to 14, and then the 3rd year they were actually eliminated in the 2nd round, and then, as I relish pointing out, went 0 for 3 in the went winless in the Memorial Cup at home, which it's happened a couple times since, but at that time it was kind of novel, Neil.
Well, let us trivia nerds digress back or return our compass to the topic at hand, and very good, Nate, by the way. It's Ted Nolan's first stint with the Buffalo Sabres, for which he is known best. And it lasted just 2 seasons from 1995 to 1997. But that's the lasting impression of his NHL coaching tenure, which also extended to a second run with the Sabres from 2013 to 15 during the tank years. They were going for McDavid. It turned out to be Eichel, and it didn't work out very well. But he was at the helm for that. And he also coached the New York Islanders for 2 seasons from 06-07 to 07-08. And during his time in Buffalo, he stood out, not only physically, there's that theme again, but for his coaching style, players coach. He got Buffalo going. They missed the playoffs in 95-96, the last year in the odd, but they won their division title in 96-97. And I will point out that that's more of a statement of their play than an achievement in itself. I don't think anyone's really concerned about winning division titles, but they hadn't won one, I think, since 1981, meaning they hadn't really gotten to the top. They hadn't gotten to their height of their play, and they were getting there under Ted Nolan. They played Ottawa in that playoff, that spring playoff of 1997. They beat them in a dramatic series, and then lost to the Flyers in the 2nd round. Along the way in that Ottawa series, Dominic Hasek, the Hall of Fame goaltender, and Ted Nolan there was friction there. I don't think Ted Nolan said he was aware of it, but there was. Hasek had some issues. There was an injury that was questioned and so on. And then there was the relationship that's tied to that, which is the relationship with John Muckler, the GM, which at best was not ideal. In the end, both Muckler and Nolan were shown the door, and Muckler had won the Executive of the Year. Ted Nolan won Coach of the Year, the Jack Adams Award. And then with Muckler gone and a new GM in Darcy Regier, Ted got what he felt was a lowball offer, a 1-year contract, and he rejected it as was the plan, as it seems to be.
Yeah, I remember I read that and I was like, there was a time and place where I would have called that a PFO, and the third word is off, not offer.
So I've been thinking about it, and as any journalist, you want to make sure you want to turn over every stone and kind of get to the root of there's this great coach, and he didn't have his time in the sun per se, because he's taken his teams far and he's gotten the most out of his team. So it seems to me, especially when you look to this point with Buffalo, this first stint, is it his inability to waver from principle? Is it his unwillingness to play into this power structure? You got to keep in mind where he's come from, and his willingness to kind of play ball in that world. It's a different world. It's a corporate world, and he's kind of a guy that sticks to his principles, and he wants to reward exactly what he sees. He's not really into playing any games per se. So that may have been his demise, for better or for worse. Now, normally, because we record our intros before our interviews, we kind of have a different perspective, but sometimes for time constraints, there's a reversal. So that's the case today. We had talked to Ted, and now we're recording the intro. And so I'm going to cheat a little bit. And the book starts with a forward of Ted kicking his Jack Adams Award trophy down a flight of stairs in his home. He's already rejected the contract offer, and he's not working. And they send the replica trophy to his house. And later in the book, he removes this case that he's kicked this replica trophy down the stairs, and he picks it up and he puts it on the corner of his shelf, and the base is broken off. The cup kind of is broken off the base, and he sets it on the shelf. And I found it interesting because he said today that trophy still remains in 2 pieces. Now, if you're going to make a film, I might have made a couple. Mm-hmm. it might be the last shot or a shot right into the end where you switch, you fade to black and go into the next section, the next portion of the story. It's symbolism. Because it's kind of like the height of what he did in a lot of ways in the NHL, and it's just there in 2 pieces. And then, okay, where do you go from there? I mean, this is a man who's done so much for his community since then and during that time and all along. And above all, when you read this is a man who's truly aware of his culture. He loves his culture, and he's unafraid to represent his culture. And he's aware of this from an early age. It's deeply rooted within him. He talks about the AIM movement, which we'll get into. And we see this throughout the pages of this book, and it's kind of exceptional. It's really what moves this book in so many ways.
Yeah, and it was just coming to realize how you define, success, and it's who you influence in all the worlds that you move through. Ted's title, Life in Two Worlds, it really harkens to a theme of kind of inner conflict in other media I've had the opportunity to consume, where it looked at sort of Indigenous identity and representation in sports and the arts. Nolan wrote about how he was just, dialed in. He could not quit because he knew if he quit, it would mean that the doubters would just be able to stereotype it. And that made me think of a movie I saw as a lad, Running Brave. It's a very 1980s biopic of the Olympic champion distance runner, Billy Mills. The only person from the Americas to ever win the Olympic gold medal in the men's 10,000 meters. But the through line is Mills, he just keeps having to confront all these naysayers, including some of his own Oglala Lakota people, and they're just making assumptions about him because of stereotypes and because of someone else who, tried to go out and, pursue high performance sport and then came back, and it's just that he's like, hey, you got to know who I am, not who, that other fellow was. And I mean, that's also there when, think of Gary Smith, who used to write those incredible long form pieces in Sports Illustrated, the definitive one, 1991, Shadow of a Nation, about a Crow basketball player, Jonathan Take's enemy. It's just always that, how do I, not put myself above others, but also use my, talents and my skills. Do I stay? Do I reach out? I mean, I've also seen that in some really good Canadian movies that have come out in the last few years, like The Grizzlies and The Incredible 25th Year of Mitzi Bearclaw. I mean, cannot know, firsthand what that's like necessarily, but I can sort of relate to it better through that and through this book Ted Nolan's put out, and maybe the book, we had Brian Trottier come on and discuss with us last year, just that hunger to go out and compete and show, where you came from, but also be able to come back to it too, Neil.
Yes, thanks, Nate. And before we bring on Mr. Nolan, we want to let you know that while this interview is loaded, it's also fun. I mean, Nate, who is Darren Zach for 1,000?
What is, people will have to listen to the whole episode to find out.
Well played. As always, just a reminder, you can buy this book and any others we cover on our website. Click the Amazon link and feel free to join any of our social media platforms or comment, share things, whatever you want. Feel free to engage with us. But for now, Nate, it's time to get this show started. All right, we're back on SportsLit. Neil Acharya, Nate Sager, and very pleased to be joined by Mr. Ted Nolan to talk about his book, which we talked about at length earlier, Life in Two Worlds. So first of all, Ted, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks a lot, Neil and Nate, for having me on.
Well, we're going to get right into the questions, and we're not going to start off lightly. I mean, there's nothing light about this book, so I don't feel bad about that. But I wanted to know how you think the death of George Floyd opened the eyes of publishers to seek out a story like yours.
Well, you know what? It's funny because I never really set out to write a book, but I did an interview a couple of years ago about truth and reconciliation and the emotions of the residential schools and the day schools and everything just kind of came to the forefront. And at the same time, George Floyd incident was happening in the States, and I remember the police officer saying if you're complicit, you're a part of the problem. And so when I was asked to write a book, I hesitated for a little while, but then I said the only way things are going to get better if you speak your truth, and hopefully it'll help make a difference.
Do you think, I mean, we interviewed Brian Trottier recently. The Fred Saskamoose book came out in recent times too. I mean, it's not just George Floyd, but do you think just some of the things that have happened and the awareness out there has created an interest in kind of mainstream media and publishers to find stories other than the mainstream, like yourself?
Yeah, that's one thing I love about sports. I mean, it's or you should love about sports. It's so diverse and different personalities, different walks of life. People make it from different areas, and it's good to see now that people are reading about different stories. Not everybody grows up in a nice neighborhood. Everybody doesn't grow up in a luxurious home and things like that. So it's good to know where people come from. So in the bottom of the whole thing, people have a better understanding of the people they're watching, or the people they assume that they know about.
They certainly will with your story. It's very detailed. In terms of the culture you grew up in and Garden River First Nation. And before we get into all of that, I guess, and I hand it over to Nate to ask a couple questions, I wanted to ask you about Meg Masters, who you wrote this book with. Can you tell us a little bit about Meg and her contribution to this book?
Her contribution is huge. I couldn't put a couple sentences together without grammatical errors all over the place. So, and I have to give her a lot of credit because she was very, very understanding. She never once judged. She never once said, "Oh my goodness." She just we got along right from the get-go, really fine. And when I was asked to write a book, one of the main things I really wanted was a female author to work with me, because I feel that with my story, at least, it would have a little bit more empathy towards, sometimes guys are a little bit tough and just get over it type of things. But, those things, those days of saying just get over it are long gone, and they shouldn't even been said to begin with.
Yeah, I actually watched, Ted, the interview you had with Rod Pedersen a while ago. You spoke about that, like having that desire to bury the past. But how important do you think it is for men, my and Neil's age, men of your age, to be open and talk about things that affected you and that led you to maybe put walls up for many years?
I didn't really, excuse me, I didn't realize how many walls I did put up, from the early stages of, disappointment and things that happen in your early life. You just kind of put up a wall and you get over it. And all of a sudden, the biggest blow that happened to me at a young age was when I lost my father. And I went to Kenora, Ontario to play hockey that following winter. And the name calling and all this stuff came. I just put up a wall and just let it pretend it didn't bother me, but down deep it did. And I kept doing it over and over again, and it worked a long time. But then all of a sudden, like everything else, if you don't deal with it, eventually it's going to come to the forefront. And when I got let go by the Buffalo Sabres, that's when it kind of all the walls come crumbling down, and I went into some very dark places for a while. But mental health is a very serious thing, and I didn't realize it until you go through it. But going through it, there's a lot of people like myself out there that that have walls up, and the better you could get to them and address them, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, how possible would it have been to actually tell your story the way you've told it now if you hadn't done that?
I don't think I would have, and I think certain timing is everything, and I don't think the world was maybe ready for that truth. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what may have you, but now because there's so much emphasis now on mental health and what our kids are going through, and with the suicides and the substance abuses and neglect and all those type of things. So I think once people feel a comfort in order to speak. I didn't feel comfortable speaking about it myself, and then all of a sudden, just wake up one day and said, maybe now's the time to talk your truth.
Before I get into my next question, I want to actually ask you about that. And how did you, get as far as you did? You obviously had, it's throughout the book. You obviously talk about a great upbringing, but all kinds of different, horrible things happen, whether it's kids skating over your fingers and you being left with your brother to take care of that, and then some of the other things with women and so on. How were you able to get to the point where you're Ted Nolan, the winner of the Jack Adams and Memorial Cup winning coach? How are you able to do that where others might have probably failed and succumbed to some of the things you talk about, like your brothers, so for per se?
You know what? I always just kind of reflect back to what I know, and when I was a kid, and some of those tough nights in our house, and there was a lot of drinking, and sometimes there was fighting going on, and the one thing I've always did was went outside to my backyard rink, and I skated, and I escaped the issue, just where I went for a run. I always escaped somehow, and my escape mechanism at the time was hockey. It was a place that I felt comfortable doing, and that was my place. And I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that the biggest thing that happened to me in Buffalo was I didn't have that safe space anymore. I didn't have it to forget about my issues and forget about my problems and to focus on something else, and it wasn't there. So that's when the walls kept coming down. But to answer your question, I just really felt hockey was my escape mechanism to get away from some of those issues.
That's interesting how it became, your escape mechanism became the vehicle for you to kind of have success. Now, how much of this book is new information that you had never disclosed to anyone, as in you were the only person that knew about it until it went to print?
I don't think my family knew about it, and when I went to Kenora, for example, I just lost my father, and it was really, our family was so close, and nobody really left too much. And when I went away to Kenora, everybody thought I was going away to a special place and have a lot of fun and make a lot of friends and play something that I love to play. But it wasn't quite like that. So, but when I came home at Christmas time for the Christmas break, I just put on a smile, and I put on a great front that I was having such a great time. I couldn't wait to get back, but it was just a facade. And then when I got drafted by Detroit Red Wings, I was so elated to get drafted. Then all of a sudden reality came in. You have to leave home again. And when I left, it was almost like holding my breath all season long. I couldn't wait to come back home after the experience I had in Kenora. And that followed me throughout my whole career. So, people might have assumed that I was really enjoying myself and liking, but I had to work so hard to keep up, to tell you the truth, because the guys were so good. But to work so hard to keep up in the facade of letting people know back home that I was really enjoying it, which I really wasn't, because I think I stopped loving the game when I was about 17 years old, and it became from loving the game to just trying to survive in the game.
Right. Yeah. Those are some of the most gripping parts of the book, or the early parts of the book before you even get to to Sault Ste. Marie. I was very interested. I know Nate was too, about just learning about how you came to understand AIM, the American Indigenous movement, and what I also found interesting was the association with kind of the civil rights movement in regards to Black people, and how you saw similarities with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and what you learned from AIM. So could you, for those that haven't read the book, and listeners that are just learning this for the first time, kind of explain how you went to that wedding, and you kind of got in touch with people from AIM, and what that did for you?
Yeah, my older brother was part of the movement when he went, because we have there's not a border for us. There's not the United States and Canada. It's North America for us, and we don't call the border a border. We call it a medicine line. We go from, so we share a lot of information from one side to the other side, and so the American Indian movement was very, very strong in the United States, and some of the members came to Canada to share some of the information that they had, and a few of the members even came to my house when I was a younger boy. So all the history stuff that the people were taking in school, we were taking at home. So we had some of the Russell Means and Dennis Banks and all those guys doing speeches at events, and we got a chance to listen to their powerful messages about who we are and where we came from and what we have to fight for, and then you have a sprinkle off. You see some of the members, like Alex Akawensi was one of the first guys I met. And he had this long, shiny black hair, and it was in ponytails, and he was talking about the movement and how strong he was as a Anishinaabe man. And my brother was involved with it. He was at the wedding, and I just, from there I just went on and tried to learn as much as I can. Then you start hearing similar stories about what happened with the Black people, how Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were leading their people out of some of the issues that they're dealing with, and then all of a sudden you get to see the movies, Malcolm X movie, and
Right.
all those type of things. So I was just intrigued with the people who fought for who they are and their place in society.
Yeah, and when you went off to Kenora too, Ted, how did that, the wisdom you gained there, how did that tie to sticking it out in Kenora through all the abuse, as you came to see it as, I think you write, an act of defiance? How does those tie together?
Well, you see so much despair. You see so much because of what happened at the residential schools, and people are just starting to realize that now. And we're growing up. We've seen some of our uncles that went through some horrific times, and I always wondered what happened to them, what made them like this. And once you found out, then you say that's not going to happen to me. So when I went to Kenora, I guess that was the first real test to am I going to be intimidated? Am I going to be pushed? And am I going to be don't like it so much I'm going to quit and go home? No, I took the upper place there. I said I'm going to fight for who I am as a man and as an Anishinaabe man and in my rightful place. So I stuck it out in spite of not liking it, just to prove that we could.
And yeah, for those that haven't read the book, I mean, you went through a lot of outright. I mean, probably for I guess the first time in your life, really, you thought it was going to be one way, but it was another. And even your own team were like physically, it wasn't just the stuff in the crowd. It was your own teammates were attacking you right in training camp.
Yeah, that was probably I've never fought in hockey in my whole life going there, but I'm from a boxing family. My older brother Terry he turned professional for a little while. He won Golden Gloves, and my cousins in the city were the well-known Nolan brothers fighting in Sault Ste. Marie, and they made the Olympic team that got canceled. And so so we were always known as a boxing family. So, but I never once fought in hockey, and then I went to Kenora. It was just somebody would spear you in the back of the leg when you're standing in line to do a drill and say, what are you doing here, you stinking wahoo? And I'm going, I turn around, what are you talking about? And I speared them back.
Right.
And all of a sudden you start fighting right there, and I'm going, then all of a sudden next shift somebody else try and so that happened for a little while, and then you started getting what's going on? Why are people doing that? Then I went to school and the same thing happened there, and so it just came from everywhere. And so one of the first thoughts that came in your brain is, I got to get out of here. Yeah. But then again, that stubborn bone inside me that said, I'm going to stick it out and prove that we could play.
And you did obviously make it to the NHL, but I did that part about the school too did strike me, because you got jumped at school and then you leave school and everyone's like, oh, probably thinking, well, why do people leave school? Why would someone drop out? And then you kind of read about what you're going through, and why would you want to stay in school? With what's going on. And then later in the book, you mentioned you're at a dinner table with a friend, and they say to their kid, if you don't do your homework, you won't go to university. And you go home and you tell Sandra, well, that's how they do it. So I thought that was really interesting. But what I do want to ask you is, you obviously face a lot of overt racism and physical violence, and so on in Kenora. But it made me think of something I read in Fred Saskamu's book, which came out a few years ago, and it's called Call Me Indian. I don't know if you read it, but I just wanted to read something to you. And it's a little more about the subtle things that make you question your place, as opposed to getting, called something outright. So he says basically he was in Chicago, and there was an end of season road trip. Bill Gadsby, Bill Mosienko, Jim McFadden, and Lee Fogelin were going to go to LA. And they said, hey, Chief, you want to join us? So they basically go on this giant road trip, and then he mentions, okay, perhaps I was tired from all our evenings out, but I don't remember anything about the drive up the coast until we hit the redwood forests of Northern California, Oregon, and Washington State. And he goes on to say, basically, once we hit Seattle, we started east. We went to Bismarck, North Dakota. Lee Fogelin told me they were going to drive me straight from there to Winnipeg to drop off Bill Mosienko, and they didn't want to make the detour to Moose Jaw, where he lived. He said, you're not taking me home? And Lee said, it's too far. And so what Fred says is, I didn't know what to make of that. I thought the trip had gone well. Was it just their eagerness to get home, or had I misjudged their friendship or acceptance? And I wanted to ask you about kind of how that doubt is, some people might just say, oh, okay, that's, they could have just needed to get home. But that idea of being equal, to your teammates or to people around you when you're kind of out of your element and you're hanging out with people outside of your culture. How many times did doubts like that happen, and how do they still happen?
Yeah, not so much. I think because we grew up with such a big antenna on top of our head saying, beware. And my brothers always told me, Ted, every time you go somewhere, make sure you especially when there's drinking involved, make sure you always get your back against the wall. Make sure you look at the quickest escape out of the building. to make sure you know the escape route, and when you talk to people, you can really sense of their if they like you, or if they're just blowing smoke up your rear. And so I had a real good defense mechanism built into me at an early age. And like even some of the interviews that I went to afterwards, I could just tell it was more so just a token interview. It wasn't really, they never really asked me any in-depth questions, just kind of, okay, we asked them a couple questions, and so they could say they interviewed me. That was about it. So I had my antenna up, but thank God I had some really true friends that wouldn't steer me wrong, and to this day I'm still friends with some of the players that I played with, more so in the minors than in the NHL.
Now, I think, Ted, you're right that you loved coaching more than you loved playing. How much of that owes to just the degree of control and maybe the fact that, I don't, not to put words in your mouth, but maybe the fact that coaching was the first time you really got it as a professional?
I think coaching was one of those issues that when I played, but thank God I met Ted Lindsay at the right time. He was the general manager of Detroit Red Wings when I got drafted, and I went to training camp. And I was really intimidated because the guys were so big, and at the time I didn't really know off ice conditioning very well. I just played baseball in the summertime and went to hockey, but I never did any kind of conditioning. So I didn't have the big legs, and my arms weren't very strong, and so I went to my first training camp in Detroit, and I tell you what, I was intimidated, and I left. I left training camp, but thank God, Ted called me back and saved my career. But as you go through, you just kind of learn as you go.
And speaking of Ted Lindsay, who the NHL now has an award named after, you might not have known it at the time as a 20-year-old right out of the Ontario Junior League, but how interested were you when you learned about his history and how he fought to get a players' association going and get a better treatment for the players?
Yeah, what? When you're just referring back to your other question about who do you trust, but you can just tell when you meet people, or I could usually tell if they're sincere or not. When I first met Ted Lindsay, I could tell he was a very sincere man. He cared about his athletes, and that's what I from meeting him and when I got into my coaching part, that's what I really wanted to, whether a guy could skate a little bit faster than somebody else or shoot the puck a little bit harder than somebody else, it really doesn't matter. But what matters is how you treat those people, and that's what I really wanted to pass along when I coach. But you learn it from people like Ted Lindsay.
Your big break coaching, and obviously you started out your NHL career with Detroit and later Pittsburgh. But in terms of coaching, you joined the Sioux. And during that time, one of the, we talked about this on our last podcast with Doug McLean and Scott Morrison, the Eric Lindros saga happens, and you're right in the middle of it because he doesn't want to play for the Sioux team you're coaching, and you go and meet him. I think it's Bonnie and Carl, if I'm not mistaken, are his parents' names. And I thought it was really interesting what you wrote about in that portion. You said you went there to Eric's house. You wanted to get your piece in to kind of convince him to come to the Sioux U, and I believe Sherry Basson. But, his parents said no way right away. But you kind of came away with a respect for that. And why was that, them being so protective of their son, something that you kind of noticed and took note of?
Yeah. Well, I remember that meeting like it was yesterday. We had we're all in our suits, and Phil Esposito was there, and he had his suit on, and our ownership group, and we went and I thought we did a great sales pitch, and all of a sudden he said, "I'm not going," and they were so defiant about not going, and so I just kind of had a flashback at that moment. I said, I wish our people would have had a chance to say, no, we don't want to go to that residential school. No, we got dragged out of our houses. We got, we basically got kidnapped out of our homes to be put in these schools. And here I was with a young man who's an athlete. and he didn't want to go to Sault Ste. Marie, and I almost stood up and applauded him for that decision, because not too many people can do that back when I was growing up, and I was glad that he was able to do it, and hopefully going forward, someone who doesn't want to go somewhere has that choice.
Yeah, probably it did set a standard, but yeah, that was an interesting, cultural tie that I don't think a lot of people would have thought of and would only get out of, you being there and sharing that in this book.
Yeah, and as I guess a longtime OHL watcher, I was just struck by how many players from your generation of with the Greyhounds, that you became coaches themselves. What was it, about the culture that sort of helped that coaching tree grow?
Yeah, Nate, one of the things that I never went to a coaching clinic. I just called people that I played with who I respected and got their opinions, and I read some books about drills and talked to some people. But the biggest advice I got for coaching was my upbringing and how we were all accepted. We weren't put on a pedestal, and we weren't you're this or you that. And I mentioned it in a book that I thought I was the special one of our whole group. There was 12 of us, and I was the one they loved the most. But I heard my brother say, I heard my sister say, we all felt it. And that's the type of coach that I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a coach that just got along with the really good players and played them a lot, and they like you more. No, you have to treat everyone equal. So that's what we did in Sault Ste. Marie. And I really wanted to talk to the kids about schooling, because when I went to Kenora, I stopped going to school, and no one seemed to care. And no one ever asked me, said, Ted, are you in class? So we, along with Sherry Basson, we came up with a great rule in junior hockey that if one of our players missed school purposely, we just didn't want to go, we would wake up the following morning at 5 a.m. and have a we call it stupid practice, for somebody stupid for not going to school. And so the first year, I think we did it 3 or 4 times. In the last 4 years, we did it 0. And now I look back at that group of kids we had. We got doctors, we have investors, we have therapists, we have police officers, firemen, and I tell you, we have really good people, and a number of them went into coaching. And Rick Kowalski is one of our a 17th round, 18th round pick or whatever he was. And he just worked so hard in order to get there. And all of a sudden he ended up coaching in the minors for a long time and eventually coaching the NHL. Denny Lambert, another coach. So you're right. There's a lot of guys that coach from that team. Bobby Bugner. So it was a good group.
I should just quickly throw in, I used to work in Rick Kowalski's hometown, Simcoe, Ontario, where his dad was actually the mayor. So leadership just, I guess, ran in the family.
Oh yeah, Rick. I tell you, he was. I shouldn't say it's on there too much, but he was one of my favorites for sure. He was just he really cared. I mean, we had Chris Simon at the time, and Chris was going through some personal issues, and as another 17 or 18, 19-year-old kid who could take Chris under his wing, and they went to the movies and got him thinking about something else, and versus going out with some of his friends that took him astray once in a while. So he was a big contributions to Chris's early career.
Yeah, you actually write about Chris and Denny Lambert, and the part with Chris is really interesting because you wonder where his career, or how would it, I actually had forgotten how long he ended up playing in the NHL, and you wonder where his career might have gone had he not ran into you, right? You traded for him. I believe it was with Ottawa, right? And they were kind of trying to get rid of him. Yeah,
and our general manager Sherry Basson, he understood. He understood people very well, and I'll tell you, he was one of the brightest hockey people I've ever been associated with my entire life, both NHL and junior hockey. And when he brought up Chris Simon's name, and he said, "Hey Ted, this relationship, he's an Ojibwe, you're an Ojibwe. Maybe this, maybe there's a connection." Nation to nation with you guys, and what do you think? So he brought that up to me, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. And Chris certainly helped us win the league, and we should have won the Memorial Cup that year.
Yeah, eventually did in a third time's a charm in 1992-93. And then, a few years later, I believe it's 1995, you make the jump to head coach in the NHL. And that's with Buffalo. And I thought long and hard about how to ask you about Buffalo, because I mean the chapter speaks for itself. There's a lot going on there. There's success on the ice here. Players coach. There's players that love you, and there's some friction with John Muckler. I mean, I know myself and Nate were watching hockey a lot back then. Remember hearing about it on the hot stove every Saturday, and what's going on between Ted Nolan and John Muckler. And obviously there's also the star goalie Dominik Hasek had some issues with you, I guess, whether you knew it at the time or not. So that's a long way of getting to, first of all, we want to talk about the success, because there was success there. I talked to Brad May today, and he was talking about a little bit about why that is and how you're able to just tap into the players. But in terms of what went wrong, how much of that was culture? I go back to reading the book and your mom kind of mentioning to you, don't trust the Joganosh, if that's the way I'm saying it right. And then you come into this professional power structure, right? It's an establishment. And you seem like the type of person that you're not going to really back down, whereas others may just let a few things slide every now and then. Like, how much of it was that, you being in a power structure and you not maybe wanting to play ball within that power structure?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I wouldn't quite say it was a power for on my side, anyways. It wasn't so much a power thing. It was just the right thing. And I've always I always grew up with making the right choices for the right reasons, and don't compromise something to get something else. You have to do what's right. And the only thing I had issues with is sometimes I had to play players who were a higher draft choice than a player who maybe wasn't so high, or maybe a walk-on player that I felt was, Denny Lambert, for example. I mean, here's a guy that walked onto the National Hockey League. He never got drafted, yet he played 500 games. How would that happen if someone didn't give him that opportunity? So I really admired the work ethic in athletes, more so than their ability. I love their demeanor so much than their anything else, because that's what wins championships. You might win a few games by doing it, but you don't win championships. So I had a very hard time of playing something because of their draft position.
Right. And so, a lot of times, and just for background for those listening, the general manager is John Muckler, and you're meeting with him at times and he's asking, why aren't you playing Trefilov in net? And others, like you mentioned, maybe some of the Czech guys they brought in or higher draft picks, and you kind of want to go with your guys. So you kind of stuck to your guns, right? Because a lot of people wonder, well, Ted Nolan's had this success. Why hasn't it been able to stick? And I mean, beyond cultural reasons, I'm just wondering. Yeah, you probably touched on it. You're going to stick to what you think is right. You think that kind of went against you at times?
Oh, no question. I mean, and that's what we'll probably speak about this a little bit later on. Like, that's what happened to me in Buffalo, and that's why I physically was sick, because you're trying to lose hockey games in order to get a draft position. That was even. You shouldn't even took the job to begin with if that's what you knew you're jumping into. But to get back to this specific thing, yes, I just didn't feel like compromising somebody else's ability. The star players are going to make their money. They're going to make their stardom. But the average Joe Blow is, he might get 100 games, he might get 10 games, he might get 300 games in the NHL. But I tell you, his work, and if he's working for it, he deserves it. So that was just my personal thing that I strongly believed in, because I grew up with a father. We didn't have much growing up, and he always told me to because we're poor, you don't have to look poor. Because we don't have the best doesn't mean you can't be your best. So I just took that whole philosophy in my entire life, and here I was in the best league in the world. Then all of a sudden you're asked to compromise that a little bit, and I just I couldn't do it.
And yeah, just going through that first time in Buffalo, you're talking about in your answer, you're talking about your second time through Buffalo, which we'll get into. But yes, this is first time through Buffalo, 1995 to 1997. You and I think after your second season, you go to the second round, great series versus Ottawa, and this team's on the rise, and you win the Jack Adams trophy for Coach of the Year, Jack Adams Award. And this is how the book starts. It arrives at your house, but you're out because you got a contract offer that was insulting. And you kick the trophy down the stairs. Later in the book, you kind of take the Jack Adams, a little replica trophy. My question is, did you ever put it back together?
No, it's still in the basement. And like I said, when people read it, they'll say, "Geez, what a." It's had nothing to do with sour grapes. It was just, when you're in a mental state at that point of your life, you wish you would have done something differently. But at the point, I was just so angry that something that I felt I was really good at. Then all of a sudden, the word that you said earlier, my mom said, "Don't you ever trust those juggernauts," which means the white people. And I'm going, we could trust them. And I said, no, don't ever trust them. And anyways, it worked right up until that point. I trusted some people, and then all of a sudden, here's something that I was very good at, and they took it away. And I'm going, how could they take something away that when you prove that you're good at it, but they managed to do it somehow.
And it's interesting, yeah, because I wondered, is it's still in pieces, or at least I think the base has come off the top. So yeah, that's actually very telling. You still have it there, but never repaired it. Okay, before I let Nate jump in, I just that first stint with Buffalo, because there's a lot to talk about. When you watched, the 1999 Stanley Cup Final, and you saw that controversial puck go past Dominik Hasek, what were your thoughts?
I had two thoughts. Good that happened, and all of a sudden you go, shoot. Then you have the rest of the guys on the team, and in the city of Buffalo, and how much they deserve a championship. So that was a tough one to watch. But then again, I mean, I think it was a goal. I don't think it was kicked in.
True, but I mean, yeah, because I mean, there is the Dominik Hasek issue, right? I mean, in the end of the day, was the whole situation where with the injury in the playoffs, and was he hurt or wasn't he? I mean, what do you think it was? Was he just ended up being John Muckler's guy? Like, why do you think he didn't want to play?
Yeah, to this day, Brad and Rob Ray and they would know better, because they ran into the locker room when he left the game in Ottawa, and they confronted him. But to this day, I'm not 100% sure, because we tried to, writing the book, we tried to get him to explain his side of the story. I never thought there was any issues between us, but obviously there was, and tried to get him to talk about it. He still refused to, so I'm not 100% sure why he did what he did, and why he didn't like playing for me. He never really came out and said.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to rack my brain about it, and I thought maybe the only thing I could think of was maybe because you seem to gravitate towards I guess maybe he's a star, right? I don't know. Maybe he thought he I don't know. That's one of the things that kind of crossed my mind. But before I let Nate go, I mean, there's a lot of great parts about your time, both times in Buffalo. I know you talked about the tanking later, but it was so interesting to me about, like, I think it's Gene Knox, how you're welcome to Buffalo, and I learned about the white buffalo, why the buffalo is white on the crest, and I thought all of that was so amazing. Like, I mean, do you feel like you got a shot there because you're doing great things, coaching in Sault Ste. Marie and beyond, and then going to Hartford, but Gene Knox, her affinity towards First Nations culture.
I really believe the Knox family certainly had an impact on me coming there somehow. I'm not 100% sure how, but just by the welcoming that I got in Buffalo when I signed the contract. They had a big celebration at the University of Buffalo, and all the Senecas and all the the local Native American groups got together and they welcomed me into the city. We had a ceremony. And Gene Knox was a big part of that. And I tell you, it was a special. And I thought I finally found home away from home, and it was such a breath of fresh air going into a blue collar town with a Native American touch to it.
And the white buffalo on the crest too, like, and you talk about the spirituality, and I mean, I might be wrong on this because I don't remember exactly, but the teachings of I think it might have been the seven grandfathers. Could you just go into that about the white buffalo and that?
Yeah, there's just legends and prophecies about things will start getting better once the white buffalo comes back, and all of a sudden there was a sighting of the white buffalo within the. I'm not a true historian, but right. I just hear stories from family and growing up. But the legend of the white buffalo is really well known in our communities right across Turtle Island. So. Coaching a team with a white buffalo on the top, I'm going, who could ever predicted that?
Amazing. Go ahead.
And Ted, in between the Sabres years, the first time around, and when you finally got that right coaching opportunity with the Moncton Wildcats, what did you learn about where and why racism exists in the hockey world?
Yeah, you know what? The one thing I've always grown up with is, hockey is something that I did. It wasn't who I was. Just I really enjoyed playing, and maybe that's where part of the book people thought I was lazy. I wasn't lazy. I couldn't wait to get home. I didn't want to go golfing with the guys at the end of the season. I just couldn't wait to go home. So, anyways, then they had the presumption that I was lazy. I didn't want to. But anyways, I'm sorry. The question was.
Well, I guess it was just you write about your experiences, traveling up to Nunavut, and then of course I guess when you got the Quebec League and there was just some terrible behavior from fans. Just and you were and you're also working through why didn't the phone ring more after winning Coach of the Year in the NHL? Just what did you I guess learn about just how there is some prejudice that that hockey got to address better, and maybe is finally starting to address now.
Well, you know what? It's just one of those things where I finally after Buffalo, it kind of really hit me really hard for a few years, and because as I said earlier, hockey is what I did. It wasn't who I am, and then all of a sudden it became who I was, and all of a sudden I took it so hard, and then it took me a long time. I went through sweat lodges and I talked to some mental health people, and I finally got it out of my system, and I was finally content with what I was doing now. I was working as a National Native Role Model program, going into First Nation communities, talking to kids about substance abuses, and we started I started a foundation called the Ted Nolan Foundation, and my mother was very instrumental in my life, and she talked about the importance of education. So we started up a education adversary for First Nation women right across Canada. We raised close to $2 to $3 million, giving out. So I just loved it, and I finally got hockey out of my system. Then all of a sudden, one night I get a call from Robert Irving from the Moncton Wildcats, and asked if I'd be interested in talking to him. And I remember telling my wife, I said, "There's not a chance I'm going to Moncton." But when I got there, it flipped completely over, because that was the first time in all of my playing and coaching days. This is the first time ever in my entire life that I felt wanted. I really felt he wanted me to be a part of his organization, and I couldn't wait to go. And to this day, it's probably one of the best hockey experiences I've ever had.
Yeah, and what to you struck you as really unique about coaching in the Quebec League? I always feel like it's because it's you've got players from the Maritimes, the States, Ontario, Quebec, obviously, Europe. That it's like almost sometimes seems like the ultimate just melting pot type of league where you've got all these different hockey backgrounds coming together.
I would tell you the truth, Nate. I was scared when I finally accepted about going to Moncton. And you always have that self-doubt. You say, geez, can I still coach? Because I haven't coached in almost 9 to 10 years previous to that. I ran some hockey practices with my sons, and that was about it. But I was afraid to go in, and all of a sudden the language barrier, the style of play in the Quebec Major Junior League compared to the Ontario League or the Western Hockey League, there are three unique, distinct leagues. So going into there was kind of I was afraid, but once I got there, then all of a sudden you meet a young player like Brad Marchand. And then we go and recruit Keith Yandel from the United States. Then we traded for another guy, Philip Dupuis, who was a big star in the Quebec League, who's a true Quebecer. And all of a sudden you have a Maritime, you have a Quebecer, you have the American. Then I brought a First Nation guy in. So it sure was a melting pot, and to win the championship for Robert was definitely a highlight with all the players I had.
Mm-hmm. Now, with respect to being a hockey dad and having sons who played in the OHL, I think you note that you had hoped the Ontario and Quebec leagues that they would have outlawed fighting by the time Brandon and Jordan were old enough to play. That sort of struck me too, because now the Quebec League has taken that step this year. The OHL has limits on how often a player can fight. I guess from your point of view as a former player, as a father, as a coach, when people sort of complain about that, what's the best way to sort of respond? I guess reason with them and say this is sort of the way the sport's got to go now.
If you look at one of the young kids from the Quebec League, he just had to retire because of concussions. I mean, it's can you imagine getting punched in the head? And geez, I mean, it's a vicious thing. And I just really, don't get me wrong, I love aggressive hockey. I love contact hockey. I love hardworking hockey. But you can't get the two mixed up. If you're competing and you're battling and fighting for no reason, and then it got introduced into our game through it somewhere along the line. All of a sudden, one team wanted to get a bigger, tougher guy, then the other team wanted to get a tougher guy, and it just got out of control. And like I said, I don't mind the natural part of when you have to combat with people, but to go out to start a fight for no apparent reason, I think it should be banned for sure.
Yeah, and of course that player Lane Hinckley, his name, 19-year-old with the Charlottetown Islanders, basically told you can't play anymore. Of course, he was playing, let's say, Charlottetown, and Jim Holton, the coach, who used to be in Kingston, Neil and I's hometown, small world. What can you also just tell us about your coaching with the Wemekong women's hockey team and just what you've learned from that?
I tell you, that was the games. Actually, we did pretty well. We played a team from Saskatchewan. They I forget the young ladies' names now, but they had 4 Olympians on their team that had Métis and First Nation descent. And I tell you, they were a good team, and we lost to them 4-2. But the one thing my wife and I always talk about, we had a kind of like a little banquet the night before the event happened. And all the girls got up to introduce themselves and where they're from and their nation and what have you. And they got into their what they're doing. A lot of them were in third year medical school, third year law school. They're all in universities getting their high degrees. So I was just so impressed with that part, more so than the hockey part.
True. And I also wanted to know too, what's been the most eye-opening, aspect of the work you're doing as an advisor for the Chiefs of Ontario?
Where we are still to this day, with the water issues in some of our communities, the lack of housing. Some of our communities are a little bit remote, but the acceptance of the kids leaving into certain parts of when you leave home to go, I don't care if you're from downtown Toronto, or if you have to go to Sudbury. It's still a transition to leave. But when you had racism on top of it, when you had name calling and you don't fit in, it's really hard for our kids to adapt and to adjust. So I just think this day of age where it should be a little bit more welcoming, a little bit more understanding, but to get with the food and the jobs and what have you. So we got a lot of work to do, and our chiefs, I'm quite sure that they're working at it, but we got to work a little bit harder.
Yeah, and just to remind our audience, I think there, as a last update, there were still 28 boil water advisories that haven't been lifted yet. And I mean, it's 80% fewer than it was 8 years ago, but it's still 28 too many. Now, you mentioned playing baseball growing up. That actually jogged my memory of seeing a well-known ball player from Garden River. What should people know about Darren Zach? He was a couple of years behind you growing up.
No, Darren was our pitcher, and we, maybe the people from Sault Ste. Marie will disagree with it, but I think we closed down the city fastball league. Because we were when we joined the league, we lost games, say 11-10, 10-11. We lost 8-7. We always hit the ball, but we had no pitcher to really stop the other team. And all of a sudden, Darren learned how to pitch, and all of a sudden we were going. I think we went 2 or 3 years 33-0, 43-0. We just couldn't lose anymore because we could always hit. But we never had no pitcher. So once Darren learned how to pitch, I mean, and he was wild at the beginning, and the batters are in the box, and he was throwing that thing close to 100 miles an hour, and the pitching mound is so much shorter than fastball.
Yeah, 46 feet, yeah.
Yeah, you could just tell the batters were in there shaking their boots a little bit. But I tell you, he was, and he made the Baseball Hall of Fame. And he's my cousin back home, but our team consisted of his dad, his uncle, my brother, my 2 cousins, and 3 friends. That was it. That was our team.
Yeah, I actually saw him pitch. I guess he would have been in his mid-30s at the time for the Toronto Gators. Play a game in Napanee because the little town near halfway between Kingston and Belleville, is a big fastball hotbed. And also something else that my mom would be on me if she reads, because she's going to read the book eventually. She would be on me if I didn't ask of this about you, because it's a movie that she introduced me to. What did the first Billy Jack movie mean to you when you saw it when you were 13 or 14?
Oh, I tell you, I never walked out of a movie theater with my hand held up so high. I mean, that's Billy Jack was, to me, he was my childhood hero, even though he was a fictional character. I tell you, then you watch Billy Mills' story, but Billy Jack was certainly. Actually, I just bought a Billy Jack hat not too long ago because I'm not too sure if you're aware, but I came down with multiple myeloma probably about 6 months ago, and they had to get in the last chemo that I took, took out all my hair. So my grandson, Papa, that's all you need is a hat. So I went on and bought myself a Billy Jack hat.
I didn't know that. How is that going? How are you feeling these days? And
knock on wood, I'm feeling a lot stronger. I tell you that they're my new heroes. We talk about sport, people being your heroes, but people go through this horrible disease. They're special fighters, and the people who, the doctors and the nurses and people who work in this field, boy, they're my new heroes. And so I had to go through 4.5 months of chemo. And then the last chemo that I took after my stem cell replacement surgery, they give you the mother load of chemo, which wipes out your whole immune system and wiped out all your hair. So it's been over a month and a half, 2 months now, and I'm just starting to feel almost back to normal. Knock on wood.
Oh, great. Okay. And I did not know that. Sorry, Nate, were you about to say something?
No. Although I was just saying, you referenced Billy Mills. I do remember the biopic of him with one of Graham Greene's first acting roles. Actually, is a supporting role. Billy Mills, of course, won the 10,000 meters, 1964 Tokyo Olympics. Great movie. I remember my parents showing me.
You know what? So we're close to wrapping it up. But a couple of things, Ted. And first of all, we wish you nothing but luck and health and continued strength through all of this. As I said, I don't know about you, Nate. I did not know that. I guess a couple things, since this is, obviously about sports books and we've covered a lot of the narrative. I know I don't want to gloss over the rest of you. I mean, we only focused on 95 to 97 with the Sabres. So I'm trying to find a way to sum up, I guess, the rest. And there's a lot there. We did cover Moncton and the Sioux, but I mean, you talked about the second stint with the Islanders and the idea of tanking and how it affected you. I also wanted to ask you about the Islanders. I mean, you any Leaf fan will remember that 2007 season, and I hope I'm not screwing this up, but I'm pretty sure you guys made the playoffs on the last day of the season with Wade Dublowitz. Is that do I have that right, Ted?
Yeah, we lost our big number one Ricky DiPietro in the injuries, and Dublowitz had to come in and we won it in a shootout, I believe.
Yes.
And he came out with that famous poke check at the last one to win it. So I tell you, that was a lot of fun. And talking about that year, probably the one thing I'll remember of all my hockey, whether it's coaching Latvia in the Olympics or coaching Buffalo for the first time or winning the Memorial Cup, but standing behind the bench with Al Arbor. In that game, we brought him back so he could participate in his 1500th game and win his 900 and something game. I tell you, that was special. I never met a nicer man in my entire life, and just to be part of that special evening was special.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I thought that was a cool little touch in the book how you kind of noticed that. I think you walked by the wall and saw you had 1499 games coach. You said, why don't we bring them back? So it was your idea. Yeah,
like I said, there's just you always one thing I have to give Charles Wong a lot of credit, the former owner of the Islanders who passed away. But one thing I have to give him credit for, he always asked people for their advice and how to get more people in the buildings and what can we do and I told him, I said, when I was walking by the locker room, I said, Charles, we could have a game Sunday morning at 6:00 in the morning. I said, we could sell out this game, no question. So he looked at me and said, what's your idea? I mentioned, we said, we bring back Al. I mean, wow. So we brought him back, and I tell you, and standing behind the bench with him in all the games that he went through, and he stood there and he says, Ted, I'm a little nervous. yeah, you're nervous.
Yeah.
I'm nervous even just standing, but I tell you, what a true gentleman, and you can understand why the Islanders won. It's not because they obviously had some good players, but you also have to have a good coach.
Okay, before we wrap, I just want to say, I mean, the ultimate goal in hockey is to win the Stanley Cup, and Jordan wins the Stanley Cup in 2012. You can correct me if I'm wrong if he was on the 2014 team, but I know he was on the 2012 Kings. And what kind of, just you look back on your brother, being a Habs fan, and you talked about when you went to the Forum, going there early for the last Sabres game in the old Forum and noticing all the banners, jerseys. So when your son is a part of that, winning that cup, I mean, you must have thought back on just growing up and the allure of hockey, I'm imagining, and one day you're accessing that in a generation, right?
No, I mean, it was kind of like a surreal moment. If you remember earlier in that chapter, I was invited to an event out in Western Canada, and I was invited to a sweat lodge, and we had a sweat. And right towards the end, the keeper of the sweat lodge said, "Hey, I'm gonna have a special song for Coach here. We're gonna win him the Stanley Cup." And I wasn't working at the time. And I said, "You have to give me a job first." I said, no, we'll win you a Stanley Cup. And all of a sudden, that year, Jordan was called up to the LA Kings, and he was part of the Stanley Cup winning team, and he was part of the 2014 also, and he was also part of the St. Louis Blues. So he has three Stanley Cup rings at home. But wow. I tell you, my father's name was Stanley. And to bring the Stanley Cup back to Garden and to bring it on our famous bridge, this is Indian land. I tell you, then we brought it to a powwow. We had a powwow ceremony, and some of the friends that I grew up, and I never seen them too emotional before, but geez, some of them had tears in their eyes. And I tell you, it was one of those special moments that I'll never forget.
Ted, this is my thank you for that. And this is a final two-part question before we let you go. And we thank you for giving us this much time and for writing this book, which both myself and Nate found so interesting and learned so much from. I don't know which part of this to ask first, but I think I'll ask the last question first, or last part of the question first, which is, um, you say we have to work harder. That's how the book ends. But before I find out ways in which First Nations communities have to work harder, I want to know what are things that everybody else can do better when it comes to reconciliation, especially through hockey and specifically the NHL. I mean, what can we do better? And what can the NHL do better to kind of aid and move reconciliation forward?
The big thing is knowledge, just understanding where people are from, and even when I was growing up, do you still live in teepees? I mean, give me a break. I mean, I didn't grew up in the 1800s. We're still here, but there's just so much unknown. There's nothing taught at schools about who we are as a people, and I think that if they start putting more into the curriculum and understanding where people are from, they would have a better understanding and better empathy to people who went through some of the things that our forefathers went through. And as you look at a book, my first game in Chicago Stadium, I dropped some tobacco inside of the arena. It wasn't to celebrate my accomplishment of playing my first game. It was to recognize all the people before me who went through some horrific parts of their life in residential school. So I think education is a part of it, and if the earlier we can get it to the kids, the better off we're going to be. Teaching an old dog new tricks, I'm not too sure, but teaching the young, we can make this world a better place. And I seen a perfect example of it this past summer. My grandson plays baseball, and he misjudged a fly, and it hit him right in the head. With 3 or 4 kids ran over to him who were from the city and asked him if he was okay. I had a quick flashback. If that happened to me when I was a kid, they would have said, "Look at that dummy, he can't even catch." So things are getting better.
Do you think the NHL has gone, all over the place to try and include everybody, right? And almost chasing its tail in the last probably 3 years, and maybe a little bit beyond. But I mean, do you think they've kind of, overshot and not looked at the fact that, First Nations culture is Canadian culture, which is really hockey culture. So do you think the NHL has kind of missed the boat on that and maybe not even recognizing that in the way it should?
Well, if you see someone who looks like you, it means so much. I mean, in our communities, when Ethan Bear plays, our communities tune in. When young Montour, guy made it to the semifinals this year against the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, everybody was watching. I mean, so the more recognition you have, and there's a lot of our people who could scout. There's a lot of our people who coach. There's a lot of our people who could play, but are they given the fair opportunity? That's the one thing. And when you're born on one side of and even with myself, I mean, even though I was right in the midst of it, I still felt a little bit not accepted in the mainstream.
My last question is, you say we have to work harder, and by we, you mean First Nations people. What do you mean by that when it comes to reconciliation?
No, I don't mean we as First Nation people. I think we as a society have to work hard. It's funny because I finally came to the conclusion 2 years ago, because I was working on a National Native Role Model program for a long time. We do a lot of hockey schools in our communities, and we talk to the kids about what to expect, how to get ready, what to expect when they go try out for a team. You can't keep your head down. You got to look them in the eye. You got to do certain things, or they're going to think you're lazy. So we always try to prepare our kids and where they're going, and when they go to school, make sure you're careful. But then it finally dawned on me a couple of years ago, maybe we're educating the wrong people. Maybe we got to educate the people that our kids are going to, that understand that our kids are just kids.
Ted, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, and thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.